Welcome back to the channel, guys. You join me here at Response Motors for the GT3 build. Last time we pulled out that dashboard, we removed a bit more on the front end, and now we're gonna go ahead and pull out all the rest of the carpeting, get everything removed from that front firewall on the inside and out, and hopefully start making some progress on getting this whole front end removed off the car. If you haven't already, click that subscribe button, turn on those notifications because we've got a lot of action coming up.
Start by pulling out the carpets, which is pretty straightforward. As you can see, I'm just removing some of these plastic tabs. And the nice thing is Porsche molds all of the carpets with the foam underneath and no adhesive. So once you detach all of the fasteners, all you have to do is lift up the carpet. But as you're going to see in a second, underneath, found a couple surprises.
Okay, we pulled up the passenger side carpet and I noticed that it smelled a bit off in here, and also that Copart had left the window down. And sure enough, it's a little hard to see, but there's moisture underneath the carpet on the passenger side. And this thing has been inside here and it's not rained in quite some time because we're in California, it's very hot. So that means it has been trapped in there for a while. So the underside of the carpet has a bit of mold and mildew underneath in the back. So we're just gonna go ahead and replace this. These aren't too expensive and it's just one piece anyway, so it shouldn't be too bad. That way we can get fresh carpet in here and get rid of that smell.
Time to remove the driver's side carpet. Pretty similar to the passenger side, except you need to remove the accelerator pedal, but that's pretty easy. Just a bolt and you unclip the top. Then you go around, unsnap all of these plastic fasteners with a little interior trim removal tool and lift the carpet out. As you'll see in a second, there is some mildew and dirt underneath from sitting outside, which is really unfortunate because it really smelled.
Driver's side carpet is out, and we find more moisture, water, and sand underneath. So definitely was left outside, had some fun activities from animals and other Copart people inside of it. So now we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna pull off the pedal box. So that's this whole assembly here. It's bolted to the firewall. And then we're gonna remove all these connectors, all these harnesses, because we have to start drilling out some of the rivets, which you can see right here, in order to pull off the front end. So all this has to be removed, cleaned out, so that we can get going on the front.
Now I'm gonna start removing the pedal box from the firewall. Porsche makes this pretty straightforward. There's only a few nuts and bolts you have to take off. However, you will notice that I start to struggle on one of the bolts, and that's because it's actually threaded through into the brake booster, which I didn't realize. So it started to spin around, and I figured maybe there was just an insert loose, but I quickly realized it was from the outside and went and removed that externally. So no big deal, only took a few minutes to get that off. The entire brake booster and master cylinder is actually installed in one unit, making it pretty easy to take on and off, which you'll see me do in just a second. So one of the other things you'll notice here is the brake pedal is actually carbon fiber. Unlike the normal 911, which has a plastic brake pedal, on the GT3, Porsche makes it carbon fiber to increase the stiffness of the pedal and get you better brake feel. Now, this is a swappable component, so if you're interested in improving your brake feel on your 992 911 non-GT3, you can just install the carbon fiber pedal. So here I'm actually removing the clip that goes into the back of the brake pedal that holds it to the master cylinder and brake booster. It is inside this bracket, so it's a little hard to reach, but it's a pretty straightforward clip, and I just needed to use my trusty circular pliers, which are actually extremely nice. If you haven't gotten a set of these yet, I highly, highly recommend it, as it makes a lot of jobs really easy. See, once I remove that brake pedal, it's just a clip that goes into the back, which is pretty straightforward. It's a lot easier than trying to undo a bunch of cables. So here I'm struggling a little bit to get the assembly off the firewall, and that's because I forgot to disconnect some of the hydraulic lines, because of course I have a hydraulic clutch. So externally, there's a little module with a sensor to see when you've depressed the clutch, as well as the hydraulic clutch line that I just needed to disconnect, and then everything would come off of the firewall. But in the meantime, since the brake booster is now disconnected, I can go ahead and pull off the brake booster and master cylinder from the firewall, remove that, and then go ahead and remove the interior pedal assembly from the firewall as well, which naturally I forgot to film. So you'll just have to trust me that it's gone.
Pulled the brake booster out, pedal assembly. Now it's time to attack the wiring. So we are going to remove the main fuse blocks and the two modules on each side of the dash. Then we're gonna pull this harness back and see what we got. We're almost done getting all the wiring out of the way. So let's get everything unplugged, unbolted, and let's get it off the firewall. All right, so one of the bulkhead connectors here that bolts onto the front. So we're gonna undo these, and hopefully this is a connector and not just a pass-through, though I have my doubts because the wiring up front, as we know from the other videos, is very toast. So either we have to install a whole new harness into the vehicle, or we can disconnect it at the bulkhead and put a new one forward. So fingers crossed, we're gonna open this up and see what we got.
These large rubber pieces are bulkhead grommets, and they're really there to protect the harness going through the metal from getting damaged. So I was hoping that underneath this grommet would be a large connector. However, that's pretty unrealistic because that connector would have to be over 100 pins, which would be really expensive and it would be hard to do in production. So unfortunately, that means that I have to replace the entire vehicle harness since the front end is pretty destroyed. You could repair the front harness. However, once you get into vehicle communications and any of the high frequency lines that go to all the various ECUs, you can have impedance mismatches and that can cause problems. Plus you can get wicking of moisture that goes up and destroys the ECUs. So it's better, honestly, the harnesses aren't that expensive, to just go ahead and replace it. Right here, what I'm doing is opening up some of the mounting hardware that Porsche uses to secure the harness to the body. So Porsche actually has a spec, as do most manufacturers, that requires the harness to be secured to the body every so many inches. There's certain other manufacturers, namely Italian ones, that I just don't see this type of attention paid to securing their harnesses, especially not to this extent, which is not as nice to see and certainly leads to a lot more durability problems down the road. So right there, I used a little bit of car soap and water in a cup to lubricate the rubber prior to pulling it through the bulkheads. That makes it a lot easier. I recommend doing this on any rubber part that you're trying to remove or install. Just put a little lubricant on it, it goes a long way. So one of the things I'm doing right here is I'm just securing the harness with some cable ties, tying it up so it's a little bit easier to get through the firewall and keep it from just flopping all over the place when it comes time to pull it through and bunch it up inside the car. I'm not as worried about the connectors right now since I'm going to be replacing this harness anyway. This is mostly just to get it cleaned up and easy to deal with. It's a bit of rinse and repeat for the passenger side wiring harness, just removing some of the clips from the body. Gonna go ahead and get rid of some of those extra connectors I forgot to unplug initially, and then cable tie everything off. You're gonna see me use that soapy water again to lubricate the harness and go ahead and pull it through the firewalls of the vehicle and into the cabin. Again, here, I'm not super worried about saving any of these connectors or wondering where the positions are, because once you get a new wiring harness, it's gonna come with all of the hardware you need to install it. And because Porsche and pretty much every other manufacturer, when they build a harness, build it to exactly the right length, you don't really have to wonder where connectors go, since everything only goes just barely to where it's supposed to go. So it's pretty easy to figure out how to mount everything once you're putting it back together.
We're back inside the car, and now these main fuse boxes and ECUs are going to get pulled off so that we can pull the harness through the firewall. So we'll get rid of some of the stuff on the floor, detach the power going to the rear, and then we'll roll the harness back so that it gets out of the way, and that should be pretty much it. We'll have a really good look at what we got to do to pull off the front.
This may look like a lot of wiring, a lot of connectors and ECUs, but in reality, it's pretty straightforward to take apart. Here, I'm working on removing one of the ECUs. There's a BNC connector for the antenna, which is kind of a pain in the butt. They're really small, but otherwise, there's little clips and connectors that just slide out, so it's pretty straightforward. Then you're gonna see me remove and unbolt the housings. It's come right off. The nice thing about modern automobiles is they're designed to be put together quickly on an assembly line and efficiently without mistakes, which means connectors really only go in one spot and harnesses only go to one place. And they don't allot a lot of time at each station when they're building these cars, so they have to be done effectively. So Porsche really takes that to heart and designs these vehicles to be assembled fast. Here I'm just removing the central fuse block with the pyro fuse and the power line back to the starter motors. You can see it comes out pretty quickly. Then we're gonna go back to the passenger side footwell, remove the main fuse block here, few little bolts, comes right off, and then you just disconnect the grounds. Same thing on the driver's side. You're gonna see in a second, just a couple bolts and mostly just pulls right apart. part. There's a few big connectors, but pretty easy to remove. Then there's this odd speaker on the dashboard, which I believe is for the auxiliary sound system, though I'm not entirely sure that's in the GT3. Then once that's removed, we pull off the main fuse block, and that's pretty much it for the front wiring.
We got the main harness removed in the front. Now we got to work on pulling off around the door sill here. And so to do that, we've got to remove the rear trim panels. So I'm going to pull those off now, and then we should be able to unbolt this cable tray, get that up, and pull this whole harness back. So let's get to it.
So I cheated a little bit with some movie magic here because rear quarter inner trim panels on 911s are almost impossible to remove. I mean, we have pulled 996, 997, 991s, now 992 rear trim panels, and they're just awful. This panel I'm working on right now took quite a while to get it off. It's supposed to lift straight up. There's some clips behind that are simply wedged in to keep it from moving around, and it was just a bear to get off the side of the car. Really struggled with this. Finally got it off, but managed to break a clip in the process. Everything else was reasonably easy. Carpeting, rear trim panels. I suspect somebody has removed the rear deck lid trim because it just fell off when I worked on it. I mean, literally, I just bumped it and it fell off. So I'm gonna have to look at why, but coming up in a second, you're gonna see something pretty odd.
All right, we pulled off the rear carpet and found something interesting and alarming, actually. There seems to be a dent in the back. So right above the engine, there is a big dent that goes down. And this is perplexing because we don't see any damage around. In fact, we pulled up the side piece here. If you're taking a look down around the wheel well, and it's all straight. So why is there a dent in here? But then this material is very easy to mar, and there's nothing on there. So you can see it's creased. So my guess is something either hit this up from below or something was strapped down and yanked during the accident, because this side's fine. So that was a bit alarming, a little unsettling. We're probably gonna drop the engine anyway to take a look, and we'll be able to see underneath. So that is less fun, but now that all the interior is removed, we're going to undo these cable channels, get that harness away from the front, and start pulling off the front end.
I forgot to film removing the passenger side rear trim panel, but I can assure you it was much worse than the driver's side. Here we are removing the cable trays which hide the body harness and protect it from getting damage that goes to the back of the car, and then I'm pulling out the amp. You're going to notice that there's kind of a glitch in the video occasionally, and I just don't know why Final Cut Pro does this. It crashed once while I was editing the video, so that might have been the problem. But if I can figure it out, I can assure you I will not have that happen. Comment below if you know why this occurs occasionally. You'll see it in some of the other videos. Driver's side, just removing the cable tray as well, and that allows us to pull the harness up and move it towards the back. Last but not least, removing the headliner. This is pretty straightforward. You pull the dome light in the center. There's a little screw and then some clips that hold it on. Disconnect a few wires and then undo the bolts that hold in the sun visors. As I started to remove this headliner though and move towards the back of the car, it became very clear that somebody had taken it apart and not put it back together properly. So for no other reason than to just ensure everything was built correctly, I'm pretty much disassembling this entire car at this point. I made that decision, seeing just how much has been done wrong on the car. If we're gonna do this, we gotta do it right. So I'm just gonna keep disassembling, removing everything, checking it over, and making sure it's done correctly when we put it back together. And ladies and gentlemen, that is it. The harness is off, so now just pulling it through the firewall and rolling it towards the back of the car to get it out of the way so we can start removing the front end, because there's a lot of bolts, rivets, welds, and other things that we're gonna have to remove, and we really just wanna get the harness out of the way for no other reason, we just don't wanna cut it since I'm gonna replace it anyway. So you're gonna see me kind of bunch it up and then cover it so that it doesn't get all dirty when we start grinding away things inside the car. Now, it was at this point in the video that I realized my mic had failed. So I'm actually talking here, but you can't hear me anyway, so you're gonna get some more voiceover. So this is what the front Firewall of the 911 looks like with nothing on it. Now, when I pulled everything off, I did start to notice a little bit more damage. So you can see I'm pointing with my finger. That's where the front left wheel actually impacted the front firewall and dented it in. There's a little bit on the right side as well, but nothing too bad. So we're gonna push that out and just straighten it up. Otherwise, it's pretty clean and it's ready to go. So I've exposed all the bolts, welds, rivets, and everything that we're gonna have to remove to pull off that front. But honestly, it looks pretty cool. Without anything on it, really starts to look sort of like race car, which is neat. Here's the harness just bunched up in the back. I'll probably go ahead and pull the rest of it out down to the engine so that we can get ready to put in the new one, but I'm just gonna wait on that for a little bit. Wanted to show you a bit more of the outside of the car. You can see it's pretty stripped down. There's a couple water hoses, some brake lines that need to be tidied up, but I ended up pulling a lot of that out off camera because it really wasn't super exciting. So next up, we're gonna start actually removing this front, and that's pretty terrible to do. So if you wanna see it, join us for the next video. I'll be releasing that in about a week, and you'll see all of the fun of getting the front off this car.
All right, guys, that's a wrap for today's video. We did a ton of work on the GT3. We finished removing that wiring harness, clearing out that firewall, and up next, we're gonna start drilling out those rivets, grinding down those welds so we can pull off that front end. If you haven't already, click that subscribe button, turn on those notifications, because we've got a lot of good content coming up.